It was the kind of neighborhood people dream about. Tucked just outside Phoenix, in the edge of suburbia, where desert sunsets meet manicured lawns. The Oakcrest community looked like something out of a real estate fantasy. Streets were clean. Lawns were trimmed like golf courses. Mailboxes were perfectly spaced and painted the same muted beige. Kids laughed as they rode scooters past rows of identical two-story homes. There were block parties in the summer, Christmas lights in December, and American flags flying proudly on front porches during every national holiday. It was postcard perfect. Or, at least, it looked that way on the surface. For Laura Mitchell, it was everything she had worked for and more. Laura was a single mom in her late 30s. She taught second grade at a nearby elementary school and had spent the better part of a decade scraping together enough savings for a down payment. She'd lived in apartments most of her adult life, places where thin walls offered no privacy, where landlords ignored maintenance calls, and where parking was a daily battle. Buying her own home felt like a milestone, a symbol of stability, a reward for playing by the rules. Her house sat on a cozy corner lot with just enough yard for a rose garden and a small patio, where she could sip coffee on quiet mornings. Inside it was modest but homey, mismatched furniture, family photos, and a fridge covered with her son's drawings. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just wanted peace. A place to raise her son, Josh, who was 9, and already dreaming of becoming a firefighter. And for the first few months, peace is exactly what she got. Neighbors smiled and waved. The couple next door brought over a pie on move-in day. A retired gentleman down the street helped her carry in boxers. Laura felt like she had finally found a true community. People respected each other. They looked out for one another. The kind of place where you could leave your front door unlocked and still feel safe. Of course, she'd heard about HOAs before, homeowners associations. She wasn't entirely new to the idea. Her realtor had mentioned that Oakcrest had one. Laura remembered signing the community covenants during closing, although she didn't read all the fine print. Who does? She figured it was mostly about common sense stuff. No junk cars on the lawn, no wild paint colors, keep your yard tidy. Reasonable enough. The HOA newsletters came like clockwork. They were dry, full of meeting announcements, landscaping reminders, and tips about recycling schedules. Laura rarely read them closely. She had a full-time job, a kid to raise, and very little time to sit through meetings about fence heights and mulch colors. From her perspective, the HOA was just background noise, an invisible group that sent out reminders and maintained the neighborhood park. No harm, no foul. But as the saying goes, peace is only peace until someone decides it's not. It happened on a random Thursday. Laura had stayed late at school, helping organize a student science night. By the time she and Josh got home, it was well after dark. Exhausted, she pulled into the driveway, turned off the car, and shuffled inside. Her garage was still full of unpacked boxes from the move, holiday decorations, camping gear, and a half-assembled bookshelf she kept meaning to finish. There was no room for the car yet, but it was her property, her driveway. No one was being blocked, no street traffic, just her car parked neatly, out of the way. In front of her own garage door, she thought nothing of it. She didn't realize, as she turned off the porch light and tucked Josh into bed, that someone had already taken notice. Someone watching. Someone who cared just a little too much about how other people lived their lives. Because in Oakcrest, the rules were sacred, and Laura had just broken one. The next morning, everything seemed normal. She packed Josh's lunch, kissed him goodbye, and headed to work. It wasn't until Saturday, when she checked her mail, that the trouble revealed itself. Nestled between a coupon booklet and her electricity bill was a letter with the Oakcrest HOA logo stamped in red at the top. Laura opened it casually, assuming it was another update about lawn maintenance or pest control, but the first line made her stomach drop. Violation notice. Unauthorized overnight parking in driveway. $100 fine, compounded daily until resolved. She blinked, read it again, then a third time. Was this a joke? The letter went on to cite Section 8.3 of the Oakcrest HOA bylaws, which required all vehicles to be parked inside enclosed garages overnight to maintain the aesthetic integrity of the community. Laura stared at the paper in disbelief. Her car, a modest silver sedan, barely a few years old, wasn't loud, messy, or broken down. It wasn't an eyesore by any stretch. In fact, 2 other houses on her street regularly parked in their driveways. Why was she being singled out? Confused and slightly rattled, Laura took a walk down the block. Sure enough, there were cars parked in other driveways, just like hers. Maybe she was missing something. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe someone just hit the wrong button on a form. She would soon find out this was no mistake. This was the beginning of something much bigger. A few days later, Laura did what she always did on Saturday mornings. She slipped on her slippers, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and stepped out onto the porch to check the mail. The Arizona sun had just started warming the pavement, and the quiet hum of suburban life filled the air, sprinklers ticking, birds chirping, distant lawnmowers humming. She sorted through the stack of mail without much thought. A coupon flyer, a birthday card, from her sister, and then her fingers paused. One envelope stood out. It was stark white. stamped with an official-looking Oak Crest Homeowners Association logo in bold red ink. The name printed on it wasn't friendly. It wasn't neighborly. It felt more like a summons than a letter. Her stomach tightened. She tore it open, her coffee now trembling in her hand. Violation, notice, unauthorized. Overnight parking in driveway, $100 fine, compounded daily until resolved. Laura blinked. What? She read it again, then a third time, now holding the paper with both hands, as if steadying herself against the weight of what it said. Her brain struggled to process it. Unauthorized overnight parking. On her own driveway. Her car wasn't blocking traffic, wasn't on the street, wasn't junked or unsightly. It was a clean, well-maintained silver Toyota. She hadn't done anything wrong. This had to be a mistake. She walked back inside, sat at the kitchen table, and reread every line of the letter. It cited something called Article 8.3 Garage Parking Requirement, a rule buried somewhere in the HOA bylaws that stated, to preserve the visual aesthetics and order of the Oak Crest community, all vehicles must be parked inside and closed. Garages between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Aesthetic order. She stared at the line in disbelief. This wasn't a gated mansion community. It was a suburban neighborhood. Families lived here, teachers, nurses, parents like her. Since when did parking on your own property or own driveway as a violation of neighborhood aesthetics? Laura felt heat rise in her chest. Was this really happening? She picked up the phone and dialed the number listed on the letter, which connected her to the HOA's contracted management company. After several minutes of holding and automated prompts, a woman finally answered. Her voice was flat, rehearsed, no warmth, no empathy, just protocol. Yes. This is regarding a violation notice, Laura began, trying to remain calm. I received a letter saying I'm being fined for parking in my own driveway overnight. There was a pause on the other end. Then the woman replied, That's correct, ma'am. As per Oak Crest community guidelines, all overnight parking must be in and closed. Garages to maintain neighborhood visual standards. Laura tried to explain. I just moved in. My garage is still full of boxes. I've been working full-time and haven't had a chance to clear it yet. I'm not blocking anyone. My car is clean. No one's complained. I understand, the woman said in a monotone voice that clearly indicated she didn't. But you did sign the agreement when you moved in. These are the rules, and they apply to everyone. Laura's hands clenched into fists. This feels absurd. It's my own property. It's my own driveway. The fine will continue to accrue at $100 per day until the violation is resolved, the woman said, reading it like a script. If you'd like to appeal, you can request a hearing with the HOA board. There is a form you can submit. I can email it to you. Laura hung up without responding. She stared at the phone, stunned, feeling a sick mix of anger and disbelief. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. It was real and they were serious. The HOA, this invisible group of neighbors with power and paperwork, had just inserted themselves into her life in the most ridiculous way imaginable. By the end of the week, the fines had ballooned to $500. $500 for parking on her own driveway? That's 2 weeks of groceries. That's her son's back-to-school supplies. That's a utility bill. Maybe 2. Gone all because of a car sitting still on concrete she paid for. But it wasn't just the money. It was the principle of it. The invasive feeling. The control. The implication that she was somehow hurting the neighborhood because she didn't stuff her car into a garage full of moving boxes on night 1? She began to second-guess herself. Was she really the only one being targeted? Laura took a walk around the block that evening, paying close attention to the other homes. Sure enough, she spotted at least 4 other cars parked in driveways. Some looked like they'd been there for days. Was she the only one getting fined, or was someone watching her? That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the floorboards made her wonder if a neighbor was peeking through blinds, if someone had reported her, if there was a list with her name on it now. She started to feel like she was being watched, judged, targeted. The mailbox, once a mundane chore, now felt like a trap. Every envelope made her heart race, and the worst part, she couldn't even share her frustration. Not with the neighbors. Not yet. Not when she didn't know who might be part of the problem. This wasn't just about a car. This was about control. And the HOA had just made it personal. At first, Laura tried to handle things the neighborly way. She printed out the violation notice, circled the part about overnight parking, and attached a letter kindly asking the board to reconsider. She explained her situation, that her garage was still full from the move, that she was a teacher working 12-hour days, and that the car in question was not a junk vehicle, just her family's main mode of transportation. She even included pictures of her driveway and her car clean, modest, and neatly parked. She slipped the letter into the HOA's drop box near the clubhouse and waited, but the response never came. Instead, a second notice arrived, this time labeled Final Warning before escalation. It stated that her continued non-compliance could result in legal action, a lien placed on her property, and potential foreclosure proceedings if the fines weren't paid. That word foreclosure hit her like a punch to the gut. Was this really happening? Was her home, the one she had saved for, the one she dreamed about, being threatened over a driveway? It was surreal. But what made it worse was how quickly everything around her started to shift. She first noticed it during her usual morning walk with her son, Josh. They passed the same homes they always had, but something felt different. The greetings were shorter. The smiles, if they came at all, felt tight, forced. Her next-door neighbor, who used to chat about gardening and the weather, suddenly pulled her dog inside the moment Laura stepped out. Another woman, walking her kids to school, looked away completely. At first, Laura brushed it off. Maybe it was just in her head. Maybe she was being paranoid. After all, no one had said anything to her directly, but by week's end, the signs were too clear to ignore. The woman across the street, who used to wave every Saturday while tending her flower beds, now stared at Laura's driveway with a frown every time she walked by. One afternoon, Laura caught a man slowly cruising past her home in a golf cart, clipboard in hand, glancing repeatedly at her parked car before driving off. And then there was the HOA bulletin board near the clubhouse. Someone had posted a reminder about Rule 8.3. All vehicles must be parked inside garages overnight. Enforcement is active and non-compliance will be penalized. The notice wasn't signed, but Laura knew exactly who it was aimed at. She was no longer just a homeowner. She had become the problem. The passive-aggressive notes turned into passive-aggressive behavior. Packages started being left at odd places on her porch. Her garbage can was moved mysteriously from the curb back up to her garage while she was at work. Then she got a warning for improper trash bin placement. She received another letter about weeds in the flower bed. Even though her roses were in full bloom and meticulously cared for, Laura began to feel suffocated. Every part of her daily routine now felt like walking on glass. Was her curtain pulled too far open? Was her recycling bin too full? Was Josh's basketball hoop too visible from the street? Every little detail became a source of anxiety. Even Josh started to feel the tension. He asked why some of the neighborhood kids didn't invite him to play anymore, why people were giving them mean looks. Laura tried to reassure him, told him it was just grown-ups being grumpy, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. The worst part, she had no idea who on the board was behind all of it. HOA boards often keep members anonymous in communications, hiding behind phrases like "the board has decided" or "according to community consensus." It gave the whole thing an eerie, shadowy feeling. She couldn't have a conversation with someone. She couldn't plead her case face to face. It was like fighting a ghost with a gavel. At one point, she considered just paying the fine and letting it go. Not because she thought it was fair, but because she was exhausted. She worked hard. She raised her son alone. She didn't have the energy for this kind of silent war. But every time she picked up that notice and saw the words "foreclosure proceedings may be initiated," she felt a flicker of something else. Not fear, not stress, but anger. What kind of community turns on one of its own over a parked car? What kind of neighborhood watches a single mother get bullied by a rulebook and does nothing? That's when she made a decision. She wasn't going to pay. Not yet. Not until she understood her rights. Not until she knew exactly what this HOA was allowed to do on what they were just bluffing. And if they were bluffing, if this whole situation was based on some outdated clause being abused by a power-hungry board, then it was time to fight. Back that night, after tucking Josh into bed and staring at yet another threatening letter from the HOA, Laura finally snapped out of it. She realized she had been playing defense from the start, reacting, apologizing, hoping reason would win. But reason wasn't winning. Kindness wasn't working. The HOA wasn't a neighbor offering guidance. It was a machine. A quiet, cold system wrapped in bureaucracy and fake smiles. And Laura, she was just another line item on someone's violation list. But what the HOA didn't know was that Laura wasn't just a tired teacher or a new homeowner. She had grit. She had spent years working multiple jobs to buy that house. She had fought for everything she had, and she wasn't about to let it be taken away over a technicality. She pulled out her laptop, made a fresh cup of coffee, and started digging. Within minutes, she had the Oakcrest HOAS bylaws downloaded from their own website. The document was over 80 pages long, full of vague legal terms, outdated rules, and clauses that seemed written in another decade. Buried deep in the parking section, she found Rule 8.3, the one cited in her violation letter. All residents must store their primary vehicles in enclosed garages overnight, between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., unless otherwise approved by the board. Unless otherwise approved. That phrase jumped off the page. Nowhere in the letter had they mentioned an appeal process or temporary permission for new residents. Laura scrolled further and found an entire section outlining exceptions during transition periods, moving events, and garage clearance for newly relocated residents. So she did qualify for an exception. They just chose not to tell her. Fueled by righteous anger and curiosity, she kept digging. That's when she stumbled across forums and online communities full of homeowners venting about abusive or power-hungry HOAs. She found entire Reddit threads, Facebook groups, even YouTube channels where people shared horror stories about fines, liens, and intimidation tactics. It was like a secret world, and suddenly, Laura wasn't alone anymore. She joined a local group called Arizona HOA Watch, a nonprofit advocating for homeowner rights across the state. She messaged them, explained her situation, and within hours got a response. One of the group's volunteers, an ex-HOA board member turned whistleblower, gave her a call. His name was Marcus. He'd served on a board just like Oakcrest's for 6 years before stepping down in frustration. "Let me guess," he said after hearing Laura's story. "They've never once mentioned due process or open appeals, right?" "Exactly. And I bet the fines they're throwing at you don't even follow your state's escalation laws." Laura blinked. "Wait, there are laws about this." "Absolutely. In Arizona, an HOA can't issue compounded fines without first offering a formal hearing. They also can't threaten foreclosure unless you've been delinquent for over 90 days and the fine exceeds a certain threshold." Laura stared at the letter in her hand. Nowhere did it offer a hearing, no deadline, just threat after threat. Marcus walked her through the basics: how to draft a certified letter demanding a hearing, how to file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, and how to document everything, every letter, every call, every walk past the house. When she saw others parked in their driveways, that's when something inside Laura clicked. She wasn't the one breaking the rules. The board was, and they were banking on her ignorance and fear to keep her compliant. She printed the state HOA statutes and highlighted every section they had violated. She printed out screenshots of other homes in her neighborhood with cars in their driveways, there for days. She printed her own letter demanding an official appeal, threatening legal action, and warning that she had now contacted a homeowner rights group. And then she did something else. She prepared to speak. The next board meeting was just 5 days away. It was open to residents, held in the Oakcrest clubhouse, a place she'd never stepped foot in. But this time, she was walking in not as a helpless resident, but as someone ready to hold people accountable. That night, she stood in front of the mirror, rehearsing what she would say. Her voice was shaky at first, then it grew stronger, more clear, more confident. She imagined the faces of the board members. She imagined the expressions of the neighbors who had turned cold. She imagined taking back her dignity, and she liked how that felt by the time the meeting day arrived. Laura wasn't afraid anymore. She packed her binder of documents, put on a blazer, and walked into the clubhouse like she belonged there because she did. No one could take that from her, as she took a seat and waited for her name to be called. She glanced around the room and noticed something surprising. She wasn't the only one holding papers or looking frustrated. A few other homeowners exchanged glances with her, hesitant but curious. She wondered how many others had their own HOA stories, their own violations, their own quiet frustrations. This wasn't just about her car anymore. This was about how people are treated in their own communities, how power, when unchecked, can turn something as innocent as a driveway into a battleground. And Laura Mitchell had just drawn her line in the concrete. The Oakcrest clubhouse was packed, at least more packed than usual. A dozen or so residents filled the folding chairs arranged in neat rows, while 5 board members sat at a long table in front, flanked by printed agendas and branded names. It was the first HOA meeting Laura Mitchell had ever attended, and judging by the cautious side eyes and murmured greetings, most people there already knew her name. When her name was finally called for resident comments, Laura stood up, calmly walked to the podium, and placed her thick binder of documents on the stand with a quiet thud that made several heads turn. She started with facts.com. Controlled, professional. "I'm here regarding a violation notice I received 2 weeks ago," she said, projecting just enough to be heard in the back of the room. "A $100 daily fine for parking in my own driveway." She walked them through her timeline, her move-in date, her packed garage, the lack of any warning or opportunity for appeal. Then she cited their own bylaws, highlighting the clause about temporary exceptions for new residents. She passed around printed photos of other homes in the neighborhood, all with vehicles parked in driveways, overnight, none of whom had received fines, as far as she could tell. Next came the legalities. Laura pulled out a copy of Arizona's HOA statutes and calmly explained the violations she believed the board had committed. No offer of hearing, no reasonable timeline, no justification for compounding fines without due process. She even cited case law involving similar disputes in other Arizona communities, some of which resulted in the HOA paying damages. The room went silent. No one interrupted. No one smirked. The only sound was the turning of pages as board members flipped through the material she handed out. Then came the moment. She hadn't rehearsed the part that came straight from the heart. "I moved here because I believed this was a community," she said, her voice steady. "But what I've experienced in the last few weeks doesn't feel like community. It feels like punishment." Not one person reached out. No warning, no conversation, just fines, threats, and silence. Several residents nodded. A few looked at the board members expectantly. One woman, sitting in the second row, whispered something to her husband and shook her head. "And by the way," Laura continued, "I know I'm not the only one. I've spoken with neighbors. I've joined a homeowner rights group. And if this doesn't change, if this board continues to selectively enforce rules and threaten homeowners into submission, I will take legal action. And I will not be the only one." It was bold, direct, and it worked. The board president, man named Greg with an expensive watch and an overly polished smile, cleared his throat and tried to soften the moment. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for your feedback. We'll review the matter internally and get back to you shortly. Laura didn't flinch. No, I'd like an answer tonight. I've done my homework. You've had 2 weeks. He blinked, shifted in his seat. After a hushed side conversation among the board members, Greg finally relented. Given the documentation and your explanation, the board has decided to waive the fine. We'll issue a formal letter confirming that by the end of the week. That was it. No apology, no admission of error, just a quiet retreat. But Laura didn't need an apology, she had one. As she walked back to her seat, something unexpected happened. A man behind her clapped, then someone else joined. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it was enough to make Greg's face turn red. A quiet rebellion, right there in the community clubhouse. After the meeting, several residents approached her. One woman said, "I've been scared to speak up, but you gave me the courage." Another man asked for a copy of the state laws she brought. One couple admitted they'd been fined for planting non-approved flowers, but were too afraid to challenge it. Laura realized something powerful that night. Most people aren't okay with being pushed around. They're just scared to go first. And here's where the story ends. Or maybe, begins. Since that day, Laura has kept her driveway clear by choice, not fear. Her garage is finally organized. Her car fits perfectly, but the principle still matters. She ran for a seat on the HOA board the following year, and won, and with her help the community rewrote some of its outdated rules, added fair warning systems, and established a transparent appeal process. Small steps. Big change. But Laura's story isn't unique. That's what makes it so powerful. Every day across the country, homeowners are hit with threats, fines, and intimidation over the smallest infractions: Christmas lights, garden gnomes, mailbox paint colors, and most people either pay the fine or move. But you don't have to. So if you're watching this, and you've been targeted by your HOA, know this: you have rights. You're not alone. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to speak up, to give everyone else the courage to do the same. If this story fired you up, hit that like button, subscribe for more HOA stories, and drop a comment below. Have you ever been unfairly fined by your HOA? We want to hear your story. You never know who you might help by speaking up.